Every town has a dark side. The following story is one of Massachusetts as well as Maine's most baffling missing persons cases ever. That's not my opinion, that's coming straight from several of the detectives that have worked this case over the decades. And that's because, on a late summer evening back in 1988, 69-year-old mother and wife Virginia Douglas stepped into the Reny's department store in Belfast, Maine to use the restroom, and she was never seen again. There were no witnesses, no signs of a struggle, just an empty space where Virginia once stood. And so the questions remain the same as they did that very day. Well, did she walk away willingly on her own, or did somebody take her? Or what if she was never even there to begin with? Hey guys, it's Andrew. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Every Town where we have a real interesting case to dig into. Today we delve into the mysterious disappearance of Virginia Douglas, a case that has a lot of stories that don't quite add up to what exactly happened, but all point to the same likely scenario, and it's not a happy ending. So let's head on over to Maine right now and check out the story of Virginia, the woman that vanished into the night. Virginia and Frank Douglas had built a life together in Lexington, Massachusetts, which is a nice and fairly affluent town that sits just 20 minutes outside of Beantown. They had got married in their early 20s after meeting at the bank where they both worked. And over the years, they raised two daughters, Marilyn and Virginia, who many called Ginny, as well as son Frank Jr. And Frank retired from the bank in 1983 and enjoyed having the time off to pick up on the hobbies he loved. He became an avid tennis player, a skilled chess enthusiast, and even a skier. Now, he would go skiing for at least 1 week out of the year every winter. His days were filled with activity and social engagements, while Virginia, a devoted mother who had quit the bank many years earlier to raise their 3 children, shifted her focus to caring for the elderly. And she was known for her kindness, a more quiet but steady presence. But the thing about this dynamic was that as Frank's social life flourished, Virginia kind of found herself on the outside looking in. He was rarely home, immersed in all the stuff he was having fun doing, while she remained more isolated at home. Not a big deal, and friends and neighbors said their relationship appeared normal, but considering the circumstances of the events that would unfold, well, this detail is worth keeping in the back of your mind. On the evening of September 1st, 1988, 69-year-old Virginia and 71-year-old Frank decided to do something spontaneous. A first in their more than 46 years of marriage. And perhaps Virginia wanted to remind her husband that she still knew how to have fun. Or maybe she was just tired of being left out of all the plans. And they were going to go up to beautiful Bar Harbor, Maine, home to Acadia National Park for a little holiday weekend getaway. And they could hike around, see the sights, and enjoy each other's company, doing something different for a change to spice things up. And at around 8:30 p.m., they hopped on into their dark blue 87 Oldsmobile Cutlass and hit the road. And it was going to be a memorable trip, though in the end, it was for all the wrong reasons. Now, Bar Harbor for them was a 5-hour drive if you're really cruising. Add in stops and whatnot, and you're looking at closer to 6, so they got a late start. But they weren't in any rush. After all, the journey is part of the adventure. And so that night, they stopped on in at the South Portland Motor Inn, where they laid their weary heads before continuing their journey after breakfast the next morning. They must have really been in no rush because at 5:30 p.m. on Friday, September 2nd, Frank pulled into the parking lot of Reny's department store in Belfast, Maine. That's about 2 hours north of the motel, so they hadn't gone too far. As it were, Virginia needed to use the restroom there, and so Frank did as a good husband does. Dropped her off at the door and parked the car and waited outside. And Frank waited patiently, but as 10 and 15 minutes passed, he began to grow worried. And maybe the restroom line was long, he thought. Maybe she decided to browse the store. And he was making up justifications in his mind, but then he decided to go in and check for himself because maybe there was a medical emergency. He scribbled a quick note and left it on the steering wheel, just in case she returned while he was gone. He went inside and checked the bathroom, but she wasn't there. And he scoped out the aisles, trying to catch a glimpse, but still couldn't find her. And Frank headed back to the car to wait again. Virginia's handbag, still on the seat, containing her money, credit cards, and crucial eye medication, which she needed to use 4 times a day, and she wouldn't have gone too far. And that's when his thoughts started steering in a darker direction. Well, what if somebody did something to her? Another 10 minutes ticked by, and this time Frank went back inside with purpose. He walked every single aisle, scanning the shelves and corners, hoping to spot his wife. Nothing. Growing desperate, he stopped other shoppers, asking if they had seen her. Nobody had. And he flagged down employees and urged them to make an announcement over the store's speaker system. Still, nothing. By 6:45 p.m., with still no sign of Virginia, Frank picked up the phone, and then he called the police. The Belfast PD quickly launched an extensive search of Reny's and the surrounding areas. They interviewed store employees, some of whom recalled seeing a woman matching Virginia's description that evening, but none could confirm with certainty that it was her. One witness reported seeing a woman resembling Virginia walking west on Route 3, but inconsistencies in the reported times and circumstances led investigators to believe the sightings were unreliable. So the first sort of wrinkle in the whole case, other than the fact that a woman had disappeared, of course, was that in the end, not one single witness could place Virginia inside that store or anywhere else after she supposedly entered. For 3 days, search teams scoured the area, and Frank, who was desperate, even went as far as to hiring his own search dogs to comb through the wooded areas behind the store. He also left his car parked in the exact spot where Virginia had last seen it, with someone stationed there at all times in case she returned. Police distributed Virginia's photo, urging the public to come forward with any information. And Frank called hospitals, shelters, and family members, hoping for a lead, but still, nothing surfaced. At one point, a psychic reportedly contacted one of the Douglases' neighbors, claiming that Virginia was still inside the store. And Frank, determined to follow every possibility, convinced the store manager to open Reny's on Labor Day, despite it being closed for the holiday. And alongside the manager and 2 other employees, he searched every inch of that building, moving boxes and checking storage rooms, even inspecting the roof. But that search, like all the others, turned up empty, and Virginia Douglas had either vanished into thin air, or there was more to the story than Frank was letting on. With no concrete clues as to Virginia's whereabouts, police began retracing the couple's movements from the moment they left their home on that Thursday evening. The first known stop they made was the South Portland Motor Inn, so that's where they headed. It was here that Frank claimed they had stayed the night and had breakfast downstairs in the morning. And this was the start of a troubling pattern that seemed to be popping up, because much like nobody having seen Virginia inside the Reny store, Well, none of the staff members at the motel remembered ever seeing Virginia either. A hotel desk clerk confirmed that Frank had in fact checked in sometime after 11 p.m. on September 1st, but could not recall seeing Virginia with him at any point, neither when he arrived nor when he left the next morning. This then raised a new and important question. Well, what prompted this unique, impromptu trip? Frank's explanation, and what he told police, was that the night before they left, he and Virginia had an argument after he accidentally locked her out of the house. He said he had been watering the lawn and went inside to use the bathroom, unintentionally locking the screen door behind him. And within seconds, Virginia was at the door, visibly upset, and Frank claimed he assured her it was an accident, but she accused him of doing it deliberately. According to Frank, this kind of reaction was typical for Virginia. He described her as having mood swings and episodes of depression, sometimes shifting from cheerful to agitated in an instant. However, he insisted that they quickly made amends, and the spontaneous trip to Maine was meant as a peace offering. And Frank also told investigators that this was not the first time Virginia had disappeared. He recalled an incident 25 years earlier, when she allegedly left home after a family dispute and traveled to New York for a few days before returning. However, he insisted that this time was different. Virginia had left behind her purse, credit cards, and most notably those eye drops that she needed 4 times a day. And she wouldn't have run away on her own without those things, as Frank explained. In asking around about who the Douglases were as a couple to really try to get to know them, detectives found that those who knew them had varying perspectives on the couple's relationship. One close neighbor described it as normal, sometimes affectionate, sometimes argumentative, but nothing out of the ordinary for a marriage of nearly 50 years. However, their own daughter, Marilyn, painted a bit of a different picture. As she claimed that her father didn't respect her mom and failed to acknowledge the strong, intelligent, and warm woman she was. So, a bit darker than what you might call normal. And going back to their lives sort of taking on different paths, some of the couple's friends had also noticed a shift in their dynamic after Frank's retirement. And while he had become more active and social, Virginia had grown more isolated. And friends recalled instances where she expressed loneliness, telling them that Frank no longer spent time with her. He was always off playing tennis while she stayed at home cooking his dinners and watching him leave. And she was noticeably upset by this whole situation. Despite the growing suspicions towards Frank not telling them everything there was to know, there was still no physical evidence to indicate what had really happened to Virginia Douglas, and so the search continued. State police conducted a thorough search of the Douglas family's vehicle, recovering several items including a piece of carpet from the trunk lining, along with traces of mud and grass. However, no blood was found inside the car. Then, as investigators spoke with employees at the Reny's department store, they uncovered something peculiar that Frank had failed to mention. A store clerk recalled that shortly after reporting his wife's disappearance, Frank purchased women's lingerie. He even asked the female clerk for her size because she looked about the same as his wife so that he could get the right fit for Virginia. And what struck investigators as even stranger was that within the hour, Frank returned to the store to buy more lingerie. And all this was happening while he continued his search for his missing wife. When police later examined Virginia's suitcase, which was allegedly packed for their weekend getaway, they found that all the brand new lingerie was inside, yet there was no other underwear in the suitcase. So did Virginia forget to pack her own, or had Frank actually packed that suitcase? And realizing the police would look inside it, purchased those undergarments to try and make it appear like he hadn't messed that part up. When questioned about his purchases, Frank explained that he bought the lingerie as a good omen, quote unquote, hoping that by offering Virginia a gift, she would return to him. Or the fact that he kept this information from the police until they discovered it on their own only deepened the suspicion surrounding his actions. Daughter Ginny spent several days in Belfast assisting in the search for her mom before returning to the Lexington, Mass. Home she shared with her parents. And with her mother being missing at the top of her mind, well, suddenly some things stood out that concerned her. Virginia had always been meticulous about taking care of and securing the house, and this was what she saw as her responsibility as a good wife and mother. Yet when Ginny arrived, the windows were open, the shades were up, and the refrigerator was fully stocked with food, as though somebody had left in a hurry. Spontaneous is one thing, but the mother she knew would have drawn the blinds and locked up at the very least. Certainly taken some of the food as it would have gone bad while they were gone. She was not one to waste things. And Ginny also found it odd that her mother and father had left so late the night before, especially since she was due to return home from work just an hour later. It was uncharacteristic of Virginia not to wait for her daughter to at least say goodbye. A close friend of Virginia's shared the same sentiment, explaining that Virginia always made an effort to be home when Jenny arrived, knowing the exact time she would be returning. At first, Jenny didn't pay much attention to the strange condition of the house. However, after returning from work the following week, Ginny then made a discovery so shocking that she immediately contacted the police. Authorities later revealed that bloodstains were found on the carpet matching Virginia's blood type, and clumps of her hair were discovered near the back door, on the ground in the creases of the doorframe. You know, the type of thing you'd see perhaps if someone were dragged out of the house. So was there just an argument by that screen door, or did it go much further than that? Was Frank perhaps tired of his wife being a burden on his active lifestyle? Maybe there was a fight about just that, and with it, Frank snapped. Really, the possibilities of what happened are kinda endless, and all just speculation, but I'll let you be the judge. In the end, though, Virginia did live in that house, so her blood and even her hair sort of belonged there, at least as far as evidence is concerned. Virginia's disappearance had the family divided, and Marilyn and Ginny found the circumstances beyond strange, but Frank Jr. had other ideas. And he took his father's side, and the girls, however, did not. They said that their father hadn't even contacted them to let them know their mother was missing, and they instead had to find out from the police. Marilyn and her father had also been estranged for years before Virginia's disappearance for reasons that she has never disclosed, and this was just the icing on that cake. After discovering the blood and hair, Ginny moved out and cut ties with her father. Later that year, she returned to collect her skis, but discovered that the locks had been changed. This only fueled her suspicions further. Despite extensive searches, the investigation had nothing concrete, and just a bunch of strange stories and circumstantial evidence. Without a body, it was hard to prove what exactly happened to Virginia. Around 6 weeks after her vanishing, Frank did a disappearing act of his own. He returned to his home en masse, but stopped giving interviews to the media, essentially giving up on looking for her. Just 3 months after her disappearance, Virginia's daughters revealed to the media that they suspected she was dead and threw her a memorial service in Florida in hopes of starting the healing process. Their father, Frank, and their brother did not attend that service. Not only do Virginia's daughters believe she was murdered, but they say they know who killed her. However, due to legal reasons, they're unable to name the person they suspected. They did, however, share their suspicions with police. And Frank quickly returned to his normal life. He was back on those tennis courts. He did yard work and even chatted with neighbors as they strolled by. And one of them commented that he was always bringing Virginia up, as if he was looking for people to talk to about her. An entire year had passed when Frank hired a criminal defense lawyer, saying he did so in case he became a suspect. Not long after, in September of '89, just over a year after Virginia's disappearance, the police uncovered new information that led to a search near Sebago Lake, about 2.5 hours from Belfast and an hour and a half from Portland. That search involved police dogs, state officers, and the FBI, but the specific information that prompted the search was never disclosed. The Sebago Lake, the second largest lake in Maine, spans several towns, with Casco being particularly notable as it is home to Frank's brother. And Frank's children had called their uncle earlier to see if he had any information about Virginia, as he was the only family they knew in Maine, but they got nothing from him. Despite the extensive search, no evidence or clues were found near that lake, and there was no indication that Virginia's body or any sign of her had ever even been there. And this case remains officially classified as a missing person investigation, with no concrete evidence to confirm foul play. And 3 years after Virginia's disappearance in 1991, police did officially name Frank as a suspect in the case. At this point, Virginia's daughters, Marilyn and Ginny, stopped holding back, and they publicly shared what they had long believed, that their mother's death was not planned, but was the result of an accident. And one of them stated that in her opinion, when their dad realized what he had done, he panicked, disposed of Virginia's body, and then fabricated an implausible story that no one, neither family, friends, nor strangers, ever believed. And despite Marilyn and Ginny's firm belief that justice would one day prevail, years continued to pass with no arrests or significant developments in the case. A decade after Virginia's disappearance, a detective described the case as one of the most unusual he had ever encountered. The investigation continued, but without new evidence or breakthroughs, the mystery of Virginia's fate remains unsolved. And Frank Douglas passed away sometime after Virginia disappeared, and taking any knowledge of what really happened with him. Not much is known about his life after her disappearance, but it's reported that he spent many years living alone in their home as rumors about the case swirled around him. And so, what do you think? Did Virginia Douglas wander into that Reny's department store looking to use the bathroom, only to inexplicably vanish into the night somehow? Or was she never there to begin with? Was she never at that breakfast or that motel? And was her fate actually sealed long before that impromptu Labor Day trip ever even started? So that's it for this week's episode of Everytown. Hope you all enjoyed it. And check us out on Patreon for exclusive episodes each week and an entire library of 200 additional episodes. And remember to come back next week for another one filled with scary, strange, and mysterious stories, because you never know. Maybe your town will be next.